You know that feeling? You're scrolling just endless headlines and trying to figure out what actually matters.
Yeah, it's information overload constantly.
Exactly. And that's really why we're doing this. Welcome to the deep dive. Think of us as your way to get the important stuff without all the noise.
We go through the articles, the reports, the stack of sources, and pull out what you really need to know, tailored for you.
So today we're diving into a whole bunch of recent global happenings, trends, all centered around mid-May 2025.
It's like getting a clear snapshot, right?
Yeah.
Of a world that's moving pretty fast.
That's the idea. Our mission, if you like, is simple. Cut through the clutter. We want to spotlight the big developments, see how they might connect.
And give you the essentials, basically, so
Yeah.
you feel informed, not overwhelmed.
Right. Okay, so where do we kick things off today?
Well, a lot of our source material really focuses on President Trump's recent trip to the Middle East.
Ah, yes.
But this wasn't just, standard diplomacy. The emphasis seemed very much on the economics.
He went to Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and yeah, there were the handshakes, the usual diplomatic photo ops, sure.
But the real story seems to be these huge economic deals being hammered out.
In Saudi Arabia, his arrival sounded pretty grand, lavender carpet, honor guard on horseback, the works. And Trump himself, he sounded very upbeat about the U.S.-Saudi relationship, especially his connection with Mohammed bin Salman.
And the money involved.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what really jumps out. Beyond the $142 billion arms deal that was announced.
Which is already massive.
Right. But there's talk of potential investments hitting maybe $1 trillion.
Wow.
Yeah. The U.S.-Saudi investment forum was clearly a big deal. Look who showed up.
We're talking huge names from U.S. business, right? Elon Musk, Sam Altman from OpenAI,
Larry Fink, BlackRock, Jensen Huang from Nvidia, the chip giant.
Alex Karp, Palantir, Steve Schwartzman from Blackstone. I mean, that's a serious gathering of influence.
It really is. And it wasn't just talk either. Hyundai actually broke ground on its first manufacturing plant in the Middle East, right there in Saudi Arabia.
So connecting the dots here, it feels like these Gulf states are really pushing hard to diversify their economies.
Exactly. That seems to be the strategic play. Move beyond oil.
And technology, specifically AI, looks like a huge part of that strategy.
Definitely. The tech deals are maybe the most interesting part. Nvidia is partnering with Humain. That's part of the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Right, their big investment arm.
To build these AI factories. We're talking powered by, quote, several 100,000 Nvidia chips.
Several 100,000. That's immense computing power.
It is. And then you've got AMD with a $10 billion project for AI data centers, both in Saudi Arabia and the U.S.
And Musk again announcing Saudi Arabia is going to use Starlink for aviation and maritime shipping.
It's like they're building a whole ecosystem. Humain also did deals with Global AI, Cisco, Amazon, planning this whole AI zone.
You can see this playing out in the markets too, can't you? The sources mention chip makers, the AI stocks, they're soaring.
Yeah, they're calling it the new Trump trade. It's quite a contrast with, say, traditional defense stocks, which didn't see the same kind of bump.
It really shows where investor focus shifts during these big diplomatic pushes, especially when tech is involved.
It does raise a question, though, doesn't it? Beyond the money, what does this tech focus mean for the regions strategically and for U.S. influence?
That's a good point. On the diplomatic side, Trump also mentioned his dream for Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords.
Right, normalizing relations with Israel, like the UAE and others did.
But Mohammed bin Salman laid out a condition, a pretty big one, a permanent end to the Gaza war and a clear path to Palestinian statehood.
That's a significant hurdle, obviously.
Definitely. Something else that seemed to catch people by surprise was the U.S. lifting sanctions on Syria.
Yeah, Trump apparently said it was requested by Mohammed bin Salman.
That raised some eyebrows. But interestingly, it was welcomed by Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara and Germany, too.
Former Ambassador Robert Ford apparently sees it as vital for Syria's reconstruction, opening the door for investment after everything.
Okay, so let's shift over to Qatar. Trump's visit there was also hailed as historic, according to the emir, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani.
And again, huge economic agreements announced there, too.
We're talking over $243.5 billion initially, with potential plans, again, maybe reaching up to $1.2 trillion eventually.
Staggering numbers.
The single biggest deal seemed to be Qatar Airways buying 210 Boeing jets. That's $96 billion right there.
Wow. Largest deal Trump facilitated on the whole trip, apparently.
And the tech theme continued in Qatar as well, didn't it?
It did. Al-Raban Capital investing $1 billion in quantum technology. That's the next frontier in computing, potentially.
And workforce development in the U.S., too, with Quantinuum.
Right. Plus defense deals. $1 billion for Raytheon drone defense, $2 billion for General Atomics remotely piloted aircraft.
And the state dinner there, same big names again. Musk, Fink, Schwartzman.
So the pattern seems clear. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, this major push into tech, into AI, diversifying away from oil dependence. That's the core strategy we're seeing.
And one last thing from the Middle East part of the trip, Trump mentioned Iran. He suggested they might agree to a nuclear deal.
He did comment on that possibility in Doha. But, Iran's position hasn't really changed. They still insist on sanctions being lifted completely first.
So, still complex on that front. Okay, let's shift gears. Trade. Specifically, India and the U.S.
Right. Trump made quite a bold claim in Doha. Said India was offering a trade deal with no tariffs.
Which sounds ambitious. How did India react?
Pretty quickly and cautiously. Their external affairs minister, Dr. Jaishankar, called the remarks premature.
Okay. Diplomatic language for, hold on a minute.
Exactly. He stressed mutual benefit, the complexity.
Yeah.
Saying, nothing is decided till everything is. Classic negotiation stance.
Makes sense. And their trade minister, Piyush Goyal, was apparently already heading to Washington for talks anyway.
Right. So Trump's comments add a, let's say, interesting dynamic to those upcoming talks.
Are there any details on what India might actually be offering?
Well, reports suggest they might offer zero duties on about 60% of tariff lines initially, and preferential access for almost 90% of U.S. imports eventually.
So they are willing to negotiate, just maybe not quite the no tariffs picture Trump painted.
Seems that way. They want a deal, but on their terms and timeline.
Now, Trump also brought up Apple, didn't he? Expressing dissatisfaction about their manufacturing plans in India.
Yeah, he said he'd prefer production in the U.S., but Apple's already got pretty solid plans to ramp up iPhone production in India for the U.S. market by late 2026.
So those wheels are likely already in motion, regardless of his comments.
Probably. Looking at the numbers, U.S.-India trade was $129 billion in 2024. India has a surplus, about $45.7 billion.
And they both want to hit $500 billion by 2030.
That's the ambitious goal, yes.
Oh, right.
But India is very much operating under its India First policy and their long-term vision of Viksit Bharat, a developed India by 2047.
Okay, so a complex negotiation landscape there. Let's switch tracks completely now. Public health. What stood out around mid-May?
A lot of activity around immunization. Seems like there was a real focus on measles, but also on just building vaccine confidence generally.
Measles. Is that making a comeback?
There are definite concerns. The National Network of Immunization Coalitions is promoting a new group, Immunize Illinois. They're focused on public awareness, tackling myths. They have a vaccine ambassador program.
That sounds useful.
And Immunize Kansas expanded their Protect Against Measles campaign, adding Spanish resources, trying to reach everyone.
And the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, they're worried too?
Seems so. They held a webinar called Measles on the Rise, How to Prepare and Respond. They even put out a communication toolkit, Be Ready for Measles.
So health providers are getting resources.
Yeah, and the Association of Immunization Managers also focused on measles outbreaks in their annual report and a webinar.
Okay, so measles is definitely a key concern right now. What else on the vaccine front?
Well, May is Hepatitis Awareness Month. So the Hepatitis B Foundation and CDC were pushing Hep B vaccination, especially for adults up to age 59.
Right. And boosting general vaccine confidence.
Yeah, organizations like Vaccinate Your Family updated guides tackling things like the autism vaccine myths. CHOP, that's Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, put out new Spanish infographics on the vaccine schedule, even on bird flu.
Good to see multi-language resources.
Definitely. And ACOG, the Obstetricians and Gynecologists group, had a podcast on maternal vaccination. Important for moms and babies.
Lots of different angles being covered.
There's also a new meningitis prevention policy hub from the American Society for Meningitis Prevention, and resources on long COVID and pediatric vaccines from the Public Health Communications Collaborative.
It's quite comprehensive. Anything else noteworthy?
There was an upcoming webinar mentioned from the University of Pennsylvania about new rules for vaccine approval, specifically about requiring placebo testing for new vaccines.
Ah, that's a significant policy shift.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, a busy time for public health, particularly around vaccines and taxing outbreaks.
Got it. We also have a sort of rapid fire list of other global and domestic news snippets from around the same time, right?
Yeah, just quick mentions. Taiwan detecting Chinese military planes and ships nearby. That tension is ongoing.
Scheduled peace talks between Moscow and Kiev in Istanbul. though apparently neither Trump nor Putin were expected.
Right. Australia's PM meeting Indonesia's president on defense and trade. Singapore breaking ground on a huge airport expansion, Changi Terminal 5.
Closer to home. Sadly, news from Dundee, Michigan about a teenager's death, Bella Creek, with concerns raised about school bullying.
And the FBI reported thwarting an attack plan at a military base in Warren, Michigan. Charges filed.
Also in Michigan, a big drug bust in Detroit, thousands of pills, firearms seized, and severe weather warnings for Metro Detroit.
Diplomatically, Iraqi, Egyptian, and Jordanian foreign ministers met in Baghdad before the Arab League summit.
A tropical disease outbreak reported in northern Australia, causing deaths.
CARE welcomed the release of someone named Badar Khan Suri. Cyber attacks hit the Philippines Election Commission.
Turkey's foreign minister issued a warning about NATO's core values. Israel summoned the Spanish ambassador over something.
A report surfaced about a U.S. envoy urging Netanyahu to be more flexible with Hamas.
Drone attacks on power stations in Sudan. Syria and Germany reacting positively to the U.S. lifting sanctions. We mentioned that earlier connection.
Albania restated its goal to join the EU. Ukrainian and U.S. foreign ministers met in Turkey.
U.S. Congresswoman Tlaib introduced a resolution about the Palestinian Nakba. NATO reaffirmed support for Ukraine. Senator Graham praised Turkey's regional role.
And an interesting economic note, Irish exports to the U.S. surged, apparently ahead of potential tariffs.
Wow, that really is a whirlwind tour of global events in just a couple of days.
It shows you how much is happening simultaneously, doesn't it? And how things, even seemingly small items, connect across the globe.
So, pulling it all together as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main threads, the big interconnected themes you see?
I think first, that significant economic shift in the Middle East, really driven by tech and AI investment, a clear move away from just oil.
Right. That feels major.
Second, the complexities of trade, like we saw with the U.S. and India. It's always a delicate dance, balancing national interests and global pressures. And third, the constant ongoing need for public health vigilance. The immunization efforts show that preparing for outbreaks, building trust, it never stops.
Yeah, for me, the kind of aha moment is just the speed of change and how things connect in unexpected ways. Like you said, a presidential trip focused on Mideast economics.
Directly impacting tech stocks.
Exactly. It highlights just how intertwined global politics and the new economy, especially tech, really are now.
Absolutely. And hopefully this deep dive helps you grasp those key connections, without getting lost in every single headline.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. With nations increasingly pouring money into AI and advanced tech, how might that really reshape global power dynamics down the road, beyond just the economics?
What are the other ripple effects, the unforeseen consequences of this technological acceleration?
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.